Hello and welcome to another video for the Super Relaxed Fantasy Club. My name is Lee C Conley and I'm the author of the Dead Sagas series. Now I thought it would be cool if I did a reading for you guys today. Now I released the first book in the series last year and it's called A Ritual of Bone. It's just this one here. Now I'm due to release the second volume in a couple of months' time. So I thought it would be cool to do a reading from the new book, A Ritual of Flesh. So it'd be a nice exclusive of the Super Relaxed Fantasy Club. Now, other than myself and my editor and a few beta readers, no one else has heard or read anything from this book. So I thought that would be quite nice to do. Okay, so the reading is a chapter called Silver for Blood. Okay, here goes. They stumbled along the gully, tripping and sliding on wet stone, 4 men desperately clawing their way up onto the ridge ahead. A roiling canopy of dark cloud shifted above. The rains had come, and the deluge hadn't eased all day. Fucking rain, Niall grumbled at Hale. Could you not have come sooner? We could have missed all this. He made an incensed gesture at the sky. Took time, said Hale, wiping his dripping hair out of his eyes. We had to get our gear out, stash the supplies. You're lucky we got you out at all, mate. Took the best chance we could. We just bled for you, barked Seb, turning on Niall and blocking his ascent with the width of his shoulders. The others jolted to a stop behind him in the stony gully. 3 good lads we left back there. I saw Peg fall. The others, fuck knows, either dead or being strung up. You're damn lucky you're not with them. I certainly don't want to be dying for you, so get your ass moving. Seb turned and hefted himself higher into the gully. Niall scowled. He was the Earl's man. These landfolk should know their place, but he stayed his tongue. Seb was right. He would likely be dead and rotting in that gibbet beside the gates if it was not for the bravery of these men. He turned and threw a furtive glance over his shoulder, searching the trees behind him. Then hurried on, pulling himself along with the larger boulders. The wet stone had scraped his hands bloody. His legs were tired, his boots caked in mud, and his clothes were soaked and heavy. Despite all this, he urged his aching legs forward and continued his scrabbling ascent up the dripping gully. He caught a flash of movement away to his left, a quick glimpse of a shape, a man in the trees. Then it was gone. He snapped his head around. Nothing. Did you see something? Asked Pike from behind. Niall peered off into the trees. I thought there was something there, just for a second. It's fucking following us, muttered Pike. There ain't no fucking ghost, growled Seb from higher up. It was a fucking ghost, insisted Pike with an irritated voice. I saw it. It just stood there looking at me, and then it vanished. You didn't see anything, fool. You're just scared of the woods, snapped Seb. I saw something, I swear. Pike clutched at Niall's jacket as he clambered up beside him. Sounds funny, but did it look like the trees? Niall shook his head and pulled a look both amused and full of derision before continuing on. If he stopped more than a few moments, he worried he may not be able to start again. It looked like the trees, continued Pike, falling behind again and seemingly unbothered if anyone was listening or if any of them believed him. And then it was gone, he said with a flick of his hands. I don't know what it was, Niall replied after catching his breath. I thought it was someone running, but there is nothing there. He stopped and searched the trees again. There's something out there, I'm telling you. I reckon it's after us, whispered Pike. There's no fucking ghost, growled Seb, obviously still in earshot. Niall raised his arms and silenced them. What is that? A low call of a horn echoed through the valley, accompanied by the faint sound of barking dogs. Shit, Seb spun around at that. They might have our scent. As one of the men began frantically scrambling up the rocky gully. How did they catch us so fast? Pike huffed in disbelief. They ain't caught us yet, lad. Might not have our scent proper yet. Go, move, barked Seb. What if they do? Asked Pike in a grim tone. The boat isn't far. Come on, urged Seb. Hounds can't track us on the water. Niall hoped this boat they'd arranged wasn't far. He longed to get back on the water and away. Not just to escape, but to be back on the water. He'd spent his whole life at sea. Boats were his home to him. He wasn't sure if he liked these old lands. Seb pulled himself over the last ledge and up onto the ridge. Niall would be glad to leave this cursed gully behind. It had been steep and treacherous, but it had taken them up through the last rocky cliffs of the high valley side, each step bringing him closer to freedom. Finally, he too climbed over the ledge and turned to look back the way they had come, the winding valley stretching out before him. He searched the trees below for any sign of pursuit, but there was none. The faint barking of hounds rolling across the hillsides, but that was all. If they were indeed after him and his companions, and not some hunting party after game, they would have to go through some tough ground to cover to catch them. A network of dense and tangled valleys lay between them. "What the fuck is that?" exclaimed Hale. Niall looked up and gasped. Amongst the trees of the ridge on the rocks ahead of them sat a figure. "That's him!" hissed Pike. "It's the fucking ghost!" Seb snapped out his axe from his belt, his eyes fixed on the stranger. The half-naked man sat calmly staring back. His beard covered the lower half of his face, while his long hair hung in a tangled mess of leaves and twigs. He seemed to be wearing a loincloth. No, it was pelts, and he clutched a crude spear as he eyed them silently. "Move away, friend. Let us pass," said Bart, not at all friendly, stalking menacingly towards the man. His axe held low at his side, he motioned to the others, and Hale moved up to join him. "He looks like the woods," muttered Pike as he clambered up next to Niall and unsheathed his knife. Niall could see it now. The strange man seemed to be smeared in mud and leaves, and did indeed look like the woods behind him, blending perfectly with the surroundings. Niall unhooked his own weapon from the loop on his belt and glanced down at it. The axe was not his. It had been among the weapons hidden in the stash before his escape, sequestered in the hills outside the town's wall before Seb's crew had got him out. Niall was glad of the foresight of his rescuers. Some of these men were his people, sent to live amongst the landfolk many years ago, while others were men of Arnar, waiting for a chance to help their banished kin. All had been anticipated the time when the Earl finally called them to arms. The wild man sat motionless, watching Seb and Hale creep closer. He had an eye on all of them. There was a wet thud beside Niall. "Ugh!" cried Pike, as the feathers of an arrow suddenly appeared from his chest. He dropped the knife and tumbled to the ground, groaning. Niall spun, scanning the trees along the ridge. "They're all around us." Another arrow thrummed from the shadows and thudded into Hale's throat. The head snapped back as the impact, and he rolled into the mud, clutching his neck as blood pumped out between his fingers. Were they waiting for us? Niall sank low behind a large rock. "Shit," he muttered. He flicked a quick look at the wild man. He was gone. No sign of him anywhere. Like a ghost. Niall searched for the source of the arrows, and he found it. A cloaked figure with a bow. Seth had seen the bowman too, and was already creeping forward, stooping low behind the cover of the boulders littering the mouth of the gully. An arrow clattered off the rock beside Niall, and he ducked. Shit, that was close. Seb suddenly charged into the trees, attempting to reach their attacker before he could loose another arrow. From his hiding place, Niall watched as Pike pulled himself along the ground and picked up his knife, his teeth clenched into a grimace as he clutched the arrow buried in his chest. He clawed his way painfully up beside Niall to lean against the boulder, his breath shallow and gasping. Niall popped his head up to look over the boulder, just in time to see Seb clash with the shooter, now divested of his cloak and bow and wielding an axe in one hand and a long knife in the other. Indecision washed through Niall. He looked frantically back at Pike and then across to Hale. Pike didn't look good for much right now, so he sprang up and dashed over to Hale. He was dead. A knot of panic tightened in his stomach. I don't want to die here. If they were to escape this, Niall knew he had to help Seb, and he turned to assess their attacker. While the strange forest man had blended with the surrounds, the bowman was a bold, dark silhouette amongst the trees. He wore the weather-worn leathers and rugged clothes of a man who knew the wilds, and his dark hair hung about his shoulders his face hard and windswept. Niall sprung forward, axe clutched in hand, and charged to join his remaining comrade. Seb swung his axe wide and vicious, closing in on the bowman. The attacker parried with his long knife and deftly avoided the arc of the swinging axe with a sidestep. He hacked a savage chop at Seb's chest and then almost danced away as Seb stared at him dumbfounded. The wound in Seb's chest bloomed red through his clothes, and before Niall could reach them, the hunter hooked Seb's knee with his axe head and yanked it up, crunching through flesh and tendons. With a cry, Seb crashed to the ground, the back of his knee in ruin. Niall skidded to a halt just out of striking distance, and the attacker eyed him coldly. Niall's gaze flicked Seb as the big man writhed on the ground, clutching his leg. "Give yourself up, friend," growled the huntsman. "We have you." Niall gave no reply. With a sudden feint to the right, Niall plunged left and struck at the hunter. The hunter parried the blow with his axe and came up with a straight carving chop. Niall dodged backwards, only just avoiding it. The huntsman grinned and circled him, weapons held up in guard. Niall saw no easy opening, and the hunter seemed content to let Niall make the first move. He who strikes first often strikes last. The words of his master at arms echoed through his memory as he carefully decided his move, mirroring the attacker warily. The hunter moved first. He sprang forwards, and Niall swung at him as soon as he came within reach. With a smooth step around the scything axe, the hunter checked the back of Niall's arm with his long knife, and the cold steel bit his skin. The hunter's other hand brought his axe head up and thrust it into the underside of Niall's face. His head snapped back with the impact, and his vision swam with flashes of light, blurring out focus. The axe blade raked across his face, leaving a deep gash across his cheek. He staggered backwards, dazed, the blood dripping down his chin. "He's so fast," thought Niall, his head spinning as the world tilted sideways. Seb appeared behind him, somehow back on his feet, and with a roar, he returned to the fray. Despite his wounds, he threw himself at the hunter, swinging another mighty blow with his axe. The bowman stepped back and frantically parried with knife and axe as Seb rained down a series of savage blows, one after another, in blind fury. Seb seemed to have him on the back foot. Suddenly, a wet crunch echoed against the trees. "Ugh!" grunted Seb, staggering towards Niall. He gawped down at the sharpened spear point protruding from his chest with widening eyes. Niall blinked hard as the wild man appeared from behind his comrade and tugged his spear free before swinging it around to strike the side of Seb's head with a blunt end. A blow that should have sent any man down failed to level Seb, and somehow he remained standing. Rounding dizzily on his new attacker, he swung wildly, missing his mark and staggering. The hunter and his comrade circled him at a distance until the wild man jabbed his spear towards him. Seb coughed a gout of blood, and despite his best efforts, his attacks lost their power and frequency as his strength waned. He was losing blood fast. "He's done for. They all are." Niall turned and fled, leaving his wounded comrades to their fate. He plunged into the trees and ran for his life, expecting a blow from behind any second. A quick axe in the back as he ran would be at least a more merciful death than what awaited him. He would not return to that cage to die slowly, rotting beside his comrades. If it must be death at the hand of these landfolk, he would choose his own fate. He would take his chances in the wilds alone. The gods had often smiled at him. Why not now? He tore through the trees as fast as his legs would carry him, blood pouring from the wound in his face. He managed to smear it into his eyes as he wiped his face with his sleeve, stumbling over roots and uneven ground, slipping on moss-choked stones, but he kept his footing and urged himself onwards. He dared not look back. He heard Seb bellowing his final defiance. He would go down fighting that one. Niall risked a quick glance behind him as he ran. His heart froze. Running low to the ground, closing on him with every step, came the wild man. A pang of panic struck him, and he sprinted as hard as his legs could be forced to run. There was a strange whirring sound. Something struck his legs, fouling his steps. There was a sharp, stinging pain, and he crashed into the undergrowth, his legs bound by something. Niall reached down to find a crude bowler. The wild man loomed over him menacingly, a spear leveled at his face. No, no. With a quick whirl of his spear, no more than a sharp, fire-hardened stick, the wild man reversed the weapon and brought it down hard into his face. He fell into darkness. Okay, I'm going to leave that chapter there. I don't want to give away the next bit, so you'll have to wait for the book to come out. So, yeah, as I say, that was a reading from my new novel, A Ritual of Flesh, which should be out in the next couple of months, hopefully, so keep an eye out for that one. I'd like to say a big thank you for listening, and everyone at the Super Relaxed Fantasy Club for letting me do the video, and hopefully I'll see some of you guys soon. But yeah, say keep an eye out for A Ritual of Flesh, and if you haven't, check out A Ritual of Bone, which is out now. And yeah, that's all from me, so thank you very much. Goodbye.